Today, I'd like to discuss an extremely timely, important, relevant issue that everybody, it seems, just can't stop talking about, which is the abduction of the Lindbergh baby. Like, what really happened? Who did it? Did it happen at all? There are so many questions. Okay, prior to the first week of this year, I maybe thought about the Lindbergh baby for approximately 30 seconds, all of which were during random vague references made in television shows like season 7, episode 8 of The Simpsons, when the FBI went to arrest Homer's mother, and to distract them, his father claimed to be the long-lost Lindbergh baby, which led me to grow up thinking that the baby had been kidnapped and just never found, something that I now know is not true. I know that that was a mistaken belief on my part, thanks to an article in the San Francisco Chronicle that I absolutely would not have bothered to click on were it not a very slow news week, and I was very bored. Retired Oakland judge has shocking theory about infamous Lindbergh kidnapping, and it's catching on. Now, before I reveal to you the details of this shocking theory, let me share the absolute basics of this case. Because, like I said, I had no idea about any of it until I fell down this rabbit hole. So maybe you're in a similar position. Charles Lindbergh was an aviator who was launched to worldwide fame in 1927 when he won a $25,000 prize by completing the first nonstop transatlantic flight between New York City and Paris, France. 8 years earlier, a couple of guys did manage to fly from Newfoundland, Canada to County Galway, Ireland, but nobody gives a shit about those places, so who cares? Also, 5 men at least died attempting the New York-Paris route, so it was kind of a big deal. And that prize money, that's the equivalent to nearly $500,000 today. So yeah, it was front page news all over the world when Lindbergh claimed it. He got a bunch of awards. He traveled around the world being a big old celebrity. He eventually ended up in Mexico City, where he met the daughter of the U.S. ambassador there. He married Anne Morrow shortly thereafter, and they moved to New Jersey, where they became an it couple. Because back in the 1920s, it couples were allowed to live in New Jersey. Now, of course, you have to be inside the boundaries of New York. In June of 1930, they had their first baby, Charles Lindbergh Jr., aka Little Lindy, and it was again front page news. Paparazzi, letters of congratulations from all over the world, crowds at the gates, children bringing flowers, huge party. Less than 2 years later, in March of 1932, the Lindbergh's nurse realized the baby was not with his mother as she had assumed, and she informed Charles Lindbergh. He went to the nursery where he found a ransom note written in poor English demanding $50,000 for the return of the baby. He and the family's butler searched the grounds, but all they found was a discarded baby blanket and a broken ladder that appeared to have been propped up against the house in order to access the second-floor nursery. The police got involved, the family had a few more interactions with the kidnapper, and finally, in early April, they handed over the cash in the form of gold certificates, knowing that the U.S. was about to switch to greenbacks, which would make those bills stand out more. They also wrote down all of the serial numbers. In return for the money, the kidnapper handed over a note that read that the baby would be found in a boat anchored off the coast. No boat was ever found. However, in May, a truck driver happened to find the body of the toddler in a grove of trees about 5 miles away from the Lindbergh home. More than 2 years later, a man named Richard Hauptmann was caught spending one of the bills that was part of the ransom money. He claimed a friend had given him the bills before moving to Germany, where that friend died. No one believed him. He was arrested, tried, convicted, and put to death for that crime. So why did I assume that the baby had never been found? What was with all those jokes on The Simpsons and other shows? Well, years after the case concluded, conspiracy theories started flying around, including one that suggested that the baby who was found wasn't really little Lindy, but a doppelganger with the real toddler still alive. It's like the Elvis conspiracy theory. What if this famous person is actually secretly still living amongst us? Wouldn't that be weird? There were also conspiracy theories that someone in the household was a part of the kidnapping, and even theories suggesting that the Lindberghs themselves were part of it, like those suggesting that the baby died from some accident in the house and the Lindberghs invented this kidnapping in order to cover it up. Like most conspiracy theories, there was no real evidence to support any of these, but people just like to think about this stuff, don't they? All of this brings me to the Chronicle article that sent me down this path. What is the shocking theory? Could it possibly be more shocking than these previous baseless conspiracy theories, especially if it's catching on so much that it gets sober news coverage in a well-respected newspaper? Let's see. Using information gleaned from medical reports on the kidnapping and the dead baby's body, New Jersey State Police files, and papers written by Lindbergh and Nobel Prize-winning French biologist Alexis Carrel, Perelman theorizes that Lindbergh may have offered his son to Carrel to see whether they could preserve living organs outside of the body long enough to be transplanted. Perelman suggests, using medical writings and photos by Carrel and others, that Carrel or his team may have removed a thyroid and part of a carotid artery from young Charles, leading to his death, then concocting a kidnapping hoax to cover up the crime. Do you see? Do you see why I've spent the first 8 days of the new year obsessively reading about a kidnapping that happened 92 years ago? This is why. This was the first rabbit hole of 2024. True crime writer and retired Oakland judge Lisa Perelman's first evidence is that Lindbergh and Carrel were friends and that Lindbergh was a eugenicist. I was very interested to learn that both of these are true. Lindbergh's wife's sister suffered from heart problems, and he became deeply involved in her care. He was frustrated that surgeons couldn't fix a heart the same way he would fix a faulty gasket in a plane engine. Her doctor pointed out that in order to do that, they would need to be able to keep the heart pumping while they operated, something that was not possible at the time. Lindbergh was curious to learn more, so her doctor referred him to a colleague at that same institution, Nobel Prize winner Alexis Carrel, who had already developed groundbreaking surgical procedures and was, at the time, interested in organ transplantation. The two men hit it off like gangbusters, probably thanks to their similar levels of intelligence, curiosity, and belief that, yeah, the Nazis might be taking things too far, but honestly, some people are naturally better than other people, and wouldn't the world be a better place if we focused on making sure those better people were breeding as much as possible, and that the not better people were not breeding that much? Lindbergh would also go on to form a fast friendship with Henry Ford, probably for the same reasons. But back to heart surgery. Carrel told Lindbergh that the big problem he had with keeping organs alive outside of the body was infection. Sterility. Almost immediately, Lindbergh went to work designing a glass perfusion device, which Carrel was able to use to keep bits of tissue alive for up to a month without infection. Whole organs were much harder, though, because now there were metal pieces that could get infected. So the two then spent several years testing various designs in order to try to get something to work. It's during those years that little Lindy was kidnapped, or, as Perelman claims, Lindbergh handed his firstborn son over to Carrel because his son was born with what some said was an abnormally large head, and he was sickly. And as a eugenicist, Lindbergh thought the child was disposable. Look, far be it from me to defend a eugenicist. And let's be honest, a Nazi who just got a little squeamish when he saw his philosophy taken to its natural conclusion. You could certainly use Lindbergh's stated beliefs to argue that he was a monster. But in all of my research, I failed to find any evidence that he was a stupid monster. At that point in their experiments, Lindbergh and Carrel were working on the tissue and organs of animals because that's literally what has been done by scientists for centuries. They would eventually find success in 1935 by keeping the thyroid gland of a cat alive without infection for 18 days. Perelman's assumption that these two intelligent, rational scientists, before they even got that far, before they got to the cat's thyroid, they were still messing with some bits of tissue. They were failing to keep the organs of lab animals alive. And then they decided to just switch over to a human child, and not just any human child, but Lindbergh's only child. It's so preposterous, I can't even imagine seeing this plot greenlit by a Lifetime original movie. Actually, you know what? I can imagine it. I can see Eric Roberts as Charles Lindbergh, Rob Lowe as Alexis Carrel. It's late at night. They're both standing over a dying rabbit as its heart laying outside of its body pumps its final beat. Well, that's the last rabbit the Institute let us have. Well, I guess that's the end then. I guess so. Hold on, I have an idea. What? Does your family own a cat or something? No, but I do have a son with an abnormally large head. Damn, dude, I really thought that was gonna work. Sorry. It's fine, his head was huge anyway. Well, what do we do now? I have another great idea. The leaps of logic don't stop there, of course, because to assume all of that, you'd also have to assume that the household staff was all in on it, but refused to tell the police, that to cover this all up, Lindbergh himself created a worldwide media sensation by offering vast rewards for information, and that the evidence against Hauptmann was all planted or made up. By the way, here's a brief overview of that evidence. Hauptmann got into the U.S. by sneaking in because he was unable to come legally because he was a convicted criminal in his native Germany. Apparently, one of his crimes was putting a ladder against a house to climb through a second-story window and rob the inhabitants. Between the ransom exchange and his arrest, Hauptmann spent $36,000 despite being unemployed the entire time and despite it being, the Great Depression. Every handwriting expert in the country agreed that the notes were written by Hauptmann. The defense could not find one expert to argue otherwise. A plank was missing from Hauptmann's attic floor. A piece of the broken ladder fit perfectly in the gap, matching the dimensions, the grain, and the holes where the nails went. I'll stop there. There was a lot of evidence that Lindbergh had to plant. Like I said, this is hardly the first Lindbergh conspiracy theory, but I do have to give it props for being maybe the weirdest, or at least the weirdest to get mainstream media attention. Jim Fisher, professor of criminal justice at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania and writer of several books on the kidnapping, is hilariously but understandably fed up with these people who are trying to rewrite history. In regards to one true crime writer finding a handwriting expert in 1985 to argue that Hauptmann did not write the notes, Fisher writes that the expert was a graphologist who advised couples based on their handwriting characteristics if they were compatible for marriage. I would submit that couples idiotic enough to do this are probably quite suitable for each other. It's nice when stupid people find love. He goes on to say, what one believes is now more important than what one knows. Science and rational thinking have lost ground to pseudoscience and magical thinking. A large percentage of the American public consider astrology, reflexology, iridology, and graphology as real sciences. Today, if you work at a muffler shop, you're a mufflerologist. People believe in psychics, flying saucers, alien abductions, ghosts, firewalking, dowsing, and spontaneous human combustion. In a gothic world of dark conspiracies where the moon landing was faked, Elvis Presley and the Lindbergh baby are alive, Oliver Stone is an historian, and J. Edgar Hoover is remembered as a self-loathing cross-dresser. There's no such thing as historical reality. In fact, one can argue that for most people, history is dead. This is kind of embarrassing, but I should admit that reading that passage led me to do more research and discover that J. Edgar Hoover was not a cross-dresser. I just assumed that was true. I was wrong. I'm not surprised that he wasn't self-loathing because he seems like a real asshole. Self-loathing would require too much introspection. Anyway, it's particularly interesting to me that this new theory about Little Lindy was dreamed up by a retired judge because Fisher, writing years before Perlman got this press, went on to write, in the 1930s, August Vollmer, John Wigmore, and others worked hard to get the expert into court. 70 years later, judges should be throwing half of them out. In the field of scientific document examination, the graphologists are no longer at the gate, they're in the courthouse. In America, everyone has a right to express their opinion, but not in court. court. If everyone is an expert, no one is. Albert S. Osborne said it first. Judges have to find a way to identify the phonies. But because these charlatans have become such clever impersonators, it's not easy. They've created bogus diplomas, phony journals, fraudulent professional organizations, and counterfeit resumes. They're dug in, and it's going to take extreme measures to blast them out. If judges don't take responsibility for this task, little will change. Jurors are no longer capable of spotting the frauds. In fact, one way to avoid jury duty is to exhibit a rational mind and knowledge of science. Speaking as someone who was just excused from jury duty for what I suspect is that very reason, this hits hard. So it might seem pointless to talk about and to learn about a kidnapping that happened nearly a century ago, but maybe it is a worthwhile lesson. Conspiracy theories might be salacious fun, but ultimately the truth matters. History matters. If we accept the rewriting of the past, we open ourselves up to accepting the charlatans of the present. Still, I'm strangely grateful that Perlman hatched this harebrained theory and that the San Francisco Chronicle gave her credulous coverage and promotion for her new book, because otherwise I would never have learned all this. But my God, am I grateful she's no longer on the bench in my town. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.